faremo le tre relazioni, dopo faremo una pausa di 20 minuti e dopo la discussione. La prima relazione è di Joris van den Tol dell'Università di Raimund, che nous parlerà del rischio dall'industria olandese dall'età preindustriale, dalle 600-700 secolo.
I think I can use this one. Thank you very much, and also thank you for the accepting of my paper. I want to talk to you today about limiting risk in the Dutch processing industry, and this particularly, I would like to emphasize that this is sort of the early stages of a new project, so I'm very happy to receive all types of comments. So for today, I have the outline for today. I have several things that I would like to discuss. The first thing is why study processing industry anyway. The second is what type of sources do I use? And then I look at three different political levels: the urban policies, the provincial policies, and the national policies, and then I try to draw it all together in one conclusion. So why processing industry? So the economic history of the Dutch Republic is one of the 17th century that has a golden age, then an 18th century that has a decline or stagnation, and this sort of presents a paradox of why at the same time there seems to be a time of stagnation and decline, and also to be described as the first modern economy. So one explanation that has been given is that one part of the Netherlands, so one province, ate sort of all the economic activity of the other one. So here we see the meaty version of the Dutch wealth, and sort of we could assume that it's all concentrated in one particular area in Holland. The second reason, and this processing industry offers an opportunity to look at something else, because it can help us look at the Dutch economy in a different way. Because here we see the GDP at three moments in Dutch history, in the 1650s, the 1720s, and the 1770s, and we see indeed sort of the decline stagnation in the 18th century. But then, if we look at the darkest color, the re-export of colonial goods, this quadruples in size for the Dutch economy. So that makes it interesting in my mind to look at what happens in this industry. Why do the other areas of the economy decline? And also this doesn't align with Holland absorbing all this economic activity, because a lot of the processing of colonial goods happens in the landed provinces, which brings me to another reason why I think it is important to study this branch of the economy, because it allows us to connect sort of the landed provinces, so the area that is in red on the map, that is typically not connected to colonialism, globalization, this type of story. Typically we look at Holland and Zealand. Also in the previous panel, the cities that are studied are cities in Holland, right? This is an overstudied area of the country compared to the more landed provinces. Oh, okay, I can still see it. Also, processing industry offers a interesting perspective next to merchants that we typically study if we look at economic activity, because merchants and capital are very mobile, whereas processing industry offers a much more, is less mobile. You can't just easily pick up your factory and go to another place. As also as a sector of economic activity, it's understudied. So we know about fishery and agriculture quite a bit about their economy. We know about merchants a lot, obviously, but as a secondary part of the economy, especially those that don't operate outside, that don't operate within guilds, are understudied. So what type of sources have I used? I use mostly petitions. Petitions are my favorite source because they can tell you so much in a very small bit. It's like a lightning bolt that tells you all this story about what's going on. People share their personal stories, and I'm particularly interested in political petitions. So these are not what the Spanish or the Portuguese might know as the petitions of grace, where you ask for a personal favor because my grandfather fought against the war. But political petitions for me are petitions that study political legislation, or like that introduce new rules that govern the economic activity. So focus on political decision making. So I have divided the talk into 3 main areas, and I want to focus first on the urban policies. And the first story is that of the gold and silversmiths, because gold and silver predominantly came from overseas, and they are the exception in my story because it is an activity that is governed by guild, and it's sort of to show the traditional story of how a guild tries to accumulate a bigger size of the economic pie without increasing the economic pie necessarily. So the gold and silversmiths, for example, they petitioned the local government of Nijmegen in Gelderland to exclude, quote, Jews, outsiders, vagrants, or similar kinds. Right, so this is a typical story. Guilds, they try to guard off their size of the economic activity and exclude other people. Then the second activity is that of Brazil wood, and this is not guild regulated, but Brazil wood needs to be grated in order to produce a powder, and this powder can be used to dye cloth. In Amsterdam, in the city of Amsterdam, they organized this in an incarceration institution. So people that have been committed a crime, they are sent to the Rasphuis, and then they're used to, they're coerced into forced labor, grading down this activity. But then at some point, somebody outside of Amsterdam, in the Zaan area, which is an area with a lot of windmills, that what you typically associate with the Netherlands, they say, oh, we can also do this way more efficiently than you can do this with manual labor. We can use windmills to also grade down this Brazil wood, and we can outcompete you easily. So somebody says, I'm doing this. And then the city of Amsterdam and the investors in the Rasphuis, they petition the states of Holland for a provincial monopoly to exclude windmill grating of Brazil wood. And they received this monopoly, but although it excludes industrial grating of Brazil wood, the province of Holland does allow other cities to also set up their own incarceration institution to grade down Brazil wood. First is Leiden and then Rotterdam that set up similar centers. And then this is followed by examples in other cities further inland, like Deventer in Overijssel, Kampen in Overijssel, and Arnhem in Gelderland. And here we see that the local industry runs into the limits of its labor force. So this is a very labor-intensive process. So therefore, the cities of Nijmegen, Tiel, and Zaltbommel, and 3 other cities in Gelderland, they resolve to expand the potential labor force for this industry by allowing more people to be forced into this type of labor, by expanding it to people that cannot pay their fines because they're not doing anything good for the economy anyway, so we might as well make them do work that is paying off their fines. Right, so here we see that the city government expands the labor force to support this industry. Then the third example is that of cloth, and this comes from the 17th century, where French Huguenot or Protestant refugees, again in the city of Nijmegen, that had fled France after the Edict of Fontainebleau in 1685, and they petitioned the city government if they're allowed to set up a cloth weaving business, a cloth manufacturing in the city. So there had been cloth manufacturing in the city beforehand, but at this moment there was no competing industry, so the city is very happy for them to start up this industry, and they give them very favorable conditions. So in the first place, they offer these refugees free housing and free workspaces to set up their manufacturing. Also, quote, they protect the entrepreneurs for unexpected incidents of all kinds. So any risk that they run into, they are protected from this by the city government. The city also gives them an interest-free loan. They give them tax benefits for the export of their goods. And they give them a city monopoly for I think 8 years that there won't be any competing industries in the city. And moreover, the city is also generous enough to offer them 60 orphans to do the work in the manufacturing factory for free. So again, right, we see here an infant industry being protected by the city. Then in the provincial policies, I have a case study from tobacco. And again, here the tobacco industry petitions the states of Gelderland, which is one of the landed provinces. And initially, this is an individual widow who started the business with her husband and with some domestics that came along with them to Nijkerk. When she doesn't receive a positive result, she rallies all the other tobacco manufacturers or the spinners, the tobacco spinners in the province to petition together. Because the problem is that another province, the province of Holland, has put a tariff on the export of unprocessed colonial tobacco or transitory tobacco that came from the colonies and is then brought into ports in Amsterdam, Rotterdam, or Enkhuizen. And then in order for it to be transported to Gelderland, merchants or producers would have to put up a export tariff. And then these entrepreneurs in Gelderland, or these members of industry in Gelderland, they feel this is really unfair, so therefore they ask the provincial government to support this, to come with countermeasures, right, to beneficial export unprocessed or other types of measures. So what Gelderland does is they write a very stern letter and they send some delegates to Holland, but this doesn't mean any success. So Holland maintains the vision that the export of unprocessed tobacco from the colonies should be taxed at a higher rate than previously. And they emphasize that specifically they want to do this to prevent their own industry from relocating to other places. But it turns out over the next decades that this was insufficient because tobacco industry does decline in Holland and at the same time booms in other places like Gelderland and Utrecht, which is in part supported by domestic tobacco, but also still from colonial tobacco. Nevertheless, this example shows provincial support for this type of industry to protect them from regulatory changes imposed on them from another province. Then on the national level, I have an example in both sugar and in tobacco. In 1751, the stadtholder, so the highest public servant in the country, comes up with a plan to stimulate the economy because everybody agrees that it is sort of in decline. A central tenet of this plan is to limit or to reduce the taxes on the import of raw sugars or unprocessed sugar, and also to remove the duties on processed or refined sugar for export to other places of Europe. And the general idea was that this would stimulate industry. And although the stadtholder has received a lot of credit for this plan and a great vision for the economic development of the country, this too was in part the result of a petition campaign from the sugar refiners in the Netherlands. And in a few years later, they even expand their preferential position because in 1755, they also obtain a prohibition on refining sugar in the Dutch colonies, which apparently by then becomes a competing factor as well. And this is very successful, and in part from French colonies importing raw sugar and then refining them in several Dutch towns really increases eightfold in this period. On the national level, the tobacco producers also petition to, but in this time, instead of removing trade barriers, they petition to increase the export duties on unprocessed tobaccos, because the industry for tobacco in the Dutch Republic, they're really afraid that foreign industry will steal all their labor because their wages abroad are so much lower and the wages in the Netherlands are so much higher and they could never compete. And therefore, if the unprocessed tobacco would be taxed more heavily before it was exported outside of the Netherlands, they would be able to compete. And smaller towns like Eindhoven in Brabant, they emphasize that processing is very important for them because they're a small town, they don't have any big merchant activity. They can't rely on agriculture, and they really need processing and other types of industry for this town to survive economically, right? So we see here that on the city, provincial, and national level, industry is being supported through different types of policy to shield them from different types of risks. And this brings me to the conclusion. At all political levels, people try to offset economic risk. And this is, of course, a traditional story from capitalism, where private profit or profit is for the individuals, and risks and costs are trying to offset to the community. But we see this at all the political levels. And the main strategy for them to support or to limit risk is protectionism, particularly from competition by outsiders. So this outsider can be perceived as the rural areas outside of the city. It can be perceived as a different province, or it can be perceived as a different nation, but there's always this rhetoric of being protected from the risk of activity escaping to another city, or to another province, or unfair competition from another province. There's always an outsider that needs to be protected by legislation. And the cloth manufacturers in Nijmegen with the 60 infants, they of course went the furthest, and we see this very infant industry protection for a prolonged period, where the city supported new economic activity with legislation that improved, and also they hoped would attract other immigrants, other refugees from France to set up this as well, because these cloth manufacturers also were allowed to set up beds and shelters in case other refugees would come as well. Apart from protection, a second way of supporting industry is by offering additional supply of labor, particularly when it concerned forced labor, so either infants from the orphanage, or gang labor from the prison, or prison labor, or other types of coerced labor, also as a way of supporting industry that otherwise would not be economically viable, right? The grating of Brazil wood was not an economically viable activity because industry could do it cheaper, but by providing labor for free, the city hoped that it would be able to compete. Thirdly, all these types of production focused on the protection of supply and not on the protection of demand, which is quite interesting because instead of supporting industry, you can also, right, the government is also a market party, they can also mandate that certain parties are forced to buy the goods, right? You can mandate that an orphanage or another type of public institution always buy sugar at a set rate, so therefore guaranteeing demand. And this is something that was considered, for example, in the herring industry, to force the poor houses to always buy herrings, so to make sure that there was a constant demand and the industry would be able to compete. But this is not something that they do in these types of industry. And similarly, there is no subsidy that is being given to industry directly, which is being given to the fisheries as well. So every herring boat that sails out in the 18th century receives a subsidy of 500 guilders, but this type of agreement is not being given to the colonial processing industry. What this indicates is that the risk for the consumer that demand would dry up, or that demand would change, or that demand would decline, was apparently not a risk that you could offset to public government. So you can offset all types of risks, but not the risk of decline in demand. And finally, that the city support was the most far-reaching support for industry, went way further than the provincial at the national level, I would say. And on the one hand, we might expect this because what we know from the literature about guild relations and the support that guilds receive from city government also emphasizes this, but by looking at colonial processing industry, we can actually see that at multiple political levels there is support for economic processing industry. So it's not limited to cities. And by looking beyond guilds, that we can see that this type of support happens in all these activities. Thank you very much.
Grazie. La seconda relazione è de Íñigo Ena San Juan, del Instituto di Investigazione di Jaca in Aragón, che nos parlerà della ricostruzione, ridefinizione del debito del comune nella Corona d'Aragona nel Settecento. Aveva la parola.
Grazie. Thank you for the presentation. And thank you also to the organizers for having accepted the proposal to be here today. So, as the President just said, I'm going to talk about the redefinition of the legal framework for debt restructuring in the former Crown of Aragon. The title of the presentation, as you can see there, is From útil y conveniente y necesario to perjudicialísimas, injustas y contra todo fundamento legal. This refers to the main legal instrument to restructure the debt of the municipalities, which were the Concordias. I'm going to talk about this specific instrument. So, these are the contents of the presentation. I basically follow the same structure as the paper I submitted. So I'm going to follow a chronological order of events. So I'm going to speak about debt restructuring, more specifically about how the municipalities of the Crown of Aragon, which were heavily indebted, used a legal instrument called Concordia. To locate more precisely what I'm talking about, what regions, this is the medieval Crown of Aragon, and today I'm going to talk about these four territories: the Kingdom of Aragon, the Kingdom of Valencia, the Kingdom of Mallorca, and finally the Principality of Catalonia. Although I'm focused on a very specific moment, which is the decade between 1732 and 1742, more widely I'm going to speak also about the first half of the 18th century. So my main research question for this paper is, was a legal framework for debt restructuring redefined? In case it was, I can confirm that it was redefined. How was it redefined, and why did that redefinition took place? Within those debates about the redefinition, I can anticipate that the notion of common good was very present, and that there was a competition between jurisdictional powers, between courts which had power over the renegotiation of that. Since there's no much literature about the Concordias, about these agreements, I had to rely on a specific legajo, a bundle of the Spanish National Archives, which gives precious information about the Concordias and also about taxation. So, what is the situation around the early 18th century? The Aragonese model emerged in the Middle Ages. As you know, the Crown of Aragon was an important power in the Mediterranean, but to finance the expansion of the Aragonese monarchy, town councils had to issue the annuities we mentioned earlier, the censales, censos, and to service those censos or censales, a tax system had to be created. There we have the fiscal and financial model, which emerged around the mid-14th century, and that persisted almost unchanged for almost 4 centuries. By the end of the 14th century, the municipalities faced the first episodes of financial trouble. So they had to resort to instruments to reschedule their debts. So they used this widely known and used instrument known as Concordias, which is basically a compromise agreement, an agreement between two parties, which is neither according to the law nor against it. It's a very flexible instrument. You can agree almost everything unless it contradicts the law, of course. Concordias had been used for almost everything you can imagine. You can regulate the exploitation of pastures, you can, I don't know, share out an inheritance. I have also seen Concordias too, for instance, to decide how a picture was going to be drawn. But Concordias were used for almost everything. So municipalities, municipal councillors thought that it was a very good option to use these Concordias to restructure the debts. Basically, municipal creditors and town councillors negotiated how debt was going to be paid. Debt holders accepted to be paid at lower interest rates, and in exchange, they gained control over the municipal treasury. The instrument was actually quite effective, and they managed to overcome those problems of over-indebtedness. And actually, the municipalities could borrow again, sometimes even with at more advantageous conditions. These episodes of financial trouble were recurrent. There were problems in the 15th century, in the 16th century, also in the 17th century. But here, in the late 17th century, we find a completely different situation. Concordias were still used, but creditors were not merchants anymore. Almost all the debt had passed to the Catholic Church. So the profile of the creditors was rather different. They had different horizons of investment, to put it. And there was a new factor, the Decretos de Nueva Planta, which were a series of royal decrees, which were promulgated in the early 18th century by the first Bourbon king, changed the whole legal framework in the Crown of Aragon. The traditional institutions of the Crown of Aragon were abolished and replaced by Castilian ones. So, even if the whole situation changed, Concordias remained in force and continued to be approved. The new situation, the new circumstances were that the Consejo de Castilla, which was now the Supreme Court for the affairs of the Crown of Aragon, had to approve every Concordia. This could have changed the situation, but in fact it didn't, because normally it approved all the Concordias it received. Until 1732, when the ecclesiastical institutions of the northern part of the Kingdom of Aragon complained against the way in which these agreements were approved. They accused the judges of the High Court of Aragon of mediating, of forcing them to accept the terms proposed by the town councillors. So the Consejo de Castilla, which in theory knew very well the Concordias because it was passing them continually, revealed that they actually knew nothing about the Concordias because it had to ask for reports to the high courts of the Crown of Aragon. These were more or less, this is a summary of those reports. The most interesting thing here is that only in the Kingdom of Aragon, creditors could be forced to accept the terms of the municipality. As I put it here, Concordias could be approved de officio. So if the judge considered it to be appropriate, necessary, he could force the creditors to accept the terms proposed by the town council. But the Consejo de Castilla, the fiscal of the Consejo de Castilla, was actually very optimistic about the Concordias and concluded that these agreements were a resource so useful, convenient, and even necessary, and said that they have neither been practiced nor should they be practiced according to rules of law and justice, but rather based on equity and pressing necessity which must prevail. The arguments of the judges of the high courts, the Reales Audiencias of the Crown of Aragon, were that the common good, the good of the town council should prevail over the private interest or the particular interest of the creditors. So Concordias had to persist. But the Kingdom of Aragon was not happy with this conclusion, So it launched an offensive against the decision of the king of maintaining the Concordias. The clergymen submitted testimonies of how the Concordias were damaging their interests, their economies, their businesses. They defended some clauses of collective and individual responsibility for the debt, because they were convenient to their interest, of course. And they argued that they were offering favorable terms to the town councils to sign agreements. They also submitted some memoranda to the king saying that the church was almost ruined because of the Concordias approved in the Real Audiencia, and the verdict of the fiscal of the Consejo de Castilla was completely different this time. He accused the judges of the Real Audiencia de Aragón of making Concordias judicial instead of non-judicial pacts, something that were not according to the law. They could not force the creditors. They made Concordias judicial, literally, and considered them to be extremely harmful, unjust, and contrary to all legal foundations. The fiscal also recommended the king to cancel, to annul all the Concordias due to the lack of legitimate authority in those who authorize and execute them. And that was exactly what the king did. He declared all the Concordias approved by the Real Audiencia to be null and void. So all the Concordias which had not been approved by the Consejo de Castilla were immediately cancelled. The situation was clear, but paradoxically, at the same time, the king, while he was cancelling all those Concordias of the Kingdom of Aragon, granted a Majorcan nobleman, this Joan de Sales y Berga, the privilege of negotiating a Concordia with the mediation of one of the judges of the Mallorcan Audiencia. So he was, on the one hand, cancelling the agreements, and on the other one, approving the negotiation, following exactly the same procedure. The end of this conflict is not interesting. At the end, the creditors managed to avoid intervention of the judges, but this motivated a second batch of reports from the audiencias of the Crown of Aragon, which essentially repeated the same arguments as the first batch of reports. That is, that Concordias were the way to ensure that town councils were not ruined, that they do not suffer prolonged episodes of default and insolvency, and that it was preferable to preserve those town councils instead of protecting the creditors. But ironically, again, it was not very important because Concordias were in the terminal phase. In the 1740s, a series of local conflicts arose in many towns all over, not only the Spanish Crown of Aragon, but I think all Southern Europe, provoked by a sudden increase in fiscal pressure. Of course, if there are less resources, there are more conflicts because people want to, of course, control all those resources. There was more competition over the resources, and that made consensus impossible. So agreements were not signed anymore, and that represented, in fact, the end of the Concordias. So, to recapitulate more or less, Concordias, in theory, were non-judicial contracts. They were, as I said at the beginning, neither according to the law nor against it. And in theory, nobody could force creditors to accept the terms proposed by the town councils. However, in the first half of the 18th century, the judges of the Real Audiencia de Aragón contradicted this general rule and started obliging the creditors to get into those Concordias, to accept the terms proposed by the town councillors. That provoked a clash, as I put it here, between jurisdictional powers, between the Supreme Council of the monarchy and the High Court of the Crown of Aragon. Debates in which the notions of common good and private interest were widely debated, and actually there was no conclusion about what should prevail over the other. At the end, the royal prerogatives, the regalia, the capacity of the monarch to decide over the issues of the municipalities prevailed. That would be one of the consequences of the new Nueva Planta. But I would say that it was not really relevant, because what was happening at that moment in the 1740s was far more important than just this very specific issue of the Nueva Planta. I think the collapse of the Concordia system actually reflects something much wider and deeper as the collapse of this pre-modern political world. So that would be it. Thank you for your attention.
Grazie. E la terza relazione su il crollo della gran compagnia del Fugger per una squadra italo-spagnola, Elena García Guerra, Ángela Lloza, Francisco Fernández Izquierdo, Pedro Porras Arboledas, Isabella Cecchini e Giuseppe De Luca. Ma parlerà Ángela Lloza in nome di tutti. Aveva la parola.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Hilario, for this presentation. On behalf of my colleagues, Elena García Guerra, Francisco Fernández Izquierdo, Giuseppe De Luca, and Isabella Cecchini, I thank you very much for your interest in listening to this presentation. In this paper, we present the first results of a research project related to the bankruptcy of the Fugger in Spain. As many of you know, the Fuggers were a German family engaged in business related to trade, finance, and mining since the late Middle Ages. The house lent money to Charles V of Germany to achieve the imperial crown at the very beginning of the 16th century, and from then on, the house was fully integrated into the business, into the finances of the Spanish monarchy until its bankruptcy 100 years later. The history of this house is very well known. Several studies have been published, most of them in Germany and some of them in Spain. However, very little is known about the collapse of this great financial house. In a previous project, our group undertook research on financial failures within the Spanish monarchy, in particular in Spain and Italy. During the course of that previous project, we found abundant records focusing on the problems of the Fugger house at the beginning of the 17th century. And this raised our scientific interest to discover the causes that lead to the collapse of a company that had operated in Castile for 100 years without any interruption. What we present here today is just the first results of this new project, which still lasts for 2 years. With the documents and records found and compiled so far, we hope to provide a complete and satisfactory view and explanation of this crisis. In 1630, the Fugger house had already shown clear signs of exhaustion. Despite effort by Philip IV and the house itself to avoid bankruptcy, it became unavoidable in 1632. This year, a commission was formed, a commission or supervisor board, to assess the viability of the company and the eventual consequences of a default that seems to be very likely. The services the Fugger house had rendered to the Habsburg monarchy over 100 years were sufficient to keep the house from being immediately declared bankrupt after the first defaults or even after the first rumors of the lack of liquidity. However, this shouldn't be misleading. the German house couldn't be declared insolvent without causing a broader crisis in the monarchy, because the ultimate party responsible for the company's financial troubles and the one who would suffer the worst consequences was the king himself, being liable for claims by creditors of the German holding. The issue was extremely complex, and like other bankruptcies recently studied by our group, the Fugger House was not just another banker, leaseholder, or crown financial agent. Rather, it was an entity that managed, well, I have to pass this, well, this is the Fuggers of Habsburgo, the family. This house managed large territories of the Spanish monarchy. We call them the maestrazgos of the military orders of Santiago, Alcántara, and Calatrava. The Fuggers were an entity that exploited and profited the Almaden mine, from which the quicksilver essential for extracting the silver in the American mines was obtained. It was an entity that financed the monarchy across Europe, either through asientos or by way of factorías. And finally, the Fuggers were an entity that provided urgent financial aid to the king whenever he found himself in dire need of cash, which was almost always the case, especially from the beginning of the 17th century. To keep the business afloat during difficult times, such as the early years of the 17th century, the Fugger House increasingly resorted to collecting funds from private individuals, either in the form of interest-bearing deposits or by way of external operations, bearing deposit or by way of funds held in custody. These deposits were then used to finance external operations on the monarchy, and from 1626 onwards to finance the expenses of the royal household. The collection of these funds is crucial to understand the crisis of the Fugger House in Spain. The association between the Spanish monarchy and the Fugger House over a century of close collaboration fully justifies the detailed examination of the company's crisis carried out by the Consejo de Hacienda, the Treasury Council, and its affiliated bodies before the failure was officially declared. The services rendered by the German firm help explain the special treatment received. Between 1552 and 1630, the Fugger has signed asientos with the Habsburg monarchy totaling 26 million ducats. This is quite a lot of money. Furthermore, as demonstrated by the German factor Andres Irus in an inventory of services provided by the house to the Habsburg, the Fugger extracted 253,000 quintals of mercurio from the Almaden mine. Quintal is more or less 50 kilos of weight. With this 253,000 quintals, they got a yield of some 253 millions of ducats in silver. 23 millions of ducats in silver is quite a lot of money. It is true that it's a big span of time, but still it's quite a lot of money. And considering that 1/5 of this quantity belongs to the monarchy, thanks to the mercury extracted from the Almaden mine, the Habsburg got 50 million ducats in silver. So this is a very close and tight association. The Fugger House was you all know or have heard about the bankruptcies of the Spanish monarchy, or what we call suspension of payments. In 1627, there was just another bankruptcy of the Spanish monarchy, and the Fugger were excluded from that suspension of payments, just as it was in previous bankruptcies, the last one in 1607. Nonetheless, the house was exhausted when in 1628 the nominal value of the Castilian bejon, the fractional copper coin, was reduced by half. The Fuggers began to incur insignificant losses, since the wages and consignments they received under their asientos were considerably devalued. Furthermore, in 1630, the king stopped paying for mercury supplies because he needed the silver arriving from the Indias to be urgently to send it to Italy to counter the French offensive. When in 1631 the Treasury Council attempted to renegotiate the asientos with the Fuggers, they refused to proceed unless a significant portion of the outstanding debt the king had with them was paid. Aware of the firm's delicate situation, the council advised the king to allocate 200,000 ducats to the Fugger. The Treasury Council didn't know the precise financial status of the Fugger house, but it doubted that with the 200,000 ducats payment would suffice to restore the firm's liquidity. In truth, the German accepted the payment as a lesser evil, for the Royal Treasury owed them far more, between 2 and 3 million ducats. So that's what I say in the beginning of the paper, that the bankruptcy of the Fugger would be immediately the bunker of the bankruptcy of the Spanish monarchy. In any case, it was already widely known in 1632 that the Fuggers in Spain were experiencing liquidity problems. A royal decree from that year reads what follows. Let me read you a short paragraph. Given that it has been learned that in the house of Marcos and Cristobal Fugger, creditors are no longer being paid with the same satisfaction and promptness as in the past, and desiring to take the most appropriate steps in this regard, and considering the services rendered to this crown, I have resolved to form a junta, a commission or a supervisory board, composed by the Archbishop of Granada and members of my Treasury Council to examine the measures that might be taken to restore the firm's credit and improve the collection of debts owed to the company, as well as to ensure the payment of its creditors. From that moment on, the company was placed under the royal protection of the king, and so followed the guidelines set by the commission created. The first thing the commission did was to request reports on the financial situation of the house, that is, the money it owed and the resources available to pay it back. Several balance sheets were drawn up on the house debts and credits, which are being analyzed in detail at the moment. However, the paper we brought here to this conference included some interesting data on this that you can read when the proceedings of this conference are published, and I think it would help to understand the whole matter. So I'm not going further with it now. Just instead, I want to dedicate the last few minutes to highlight two issues of enormous interest. And one is the records we have found in the various archives and libraries, and the other one is a perspective of the house activity in the Bank of Deposits. I think this is the annual income of the Maestrazgos, and this is the records, the new records of the house collected today, which Francisco Fernández Izquierdo have prepared for this conference. I wonder if you can see there are a major impetus of the current research project was the identification of previously unexamined set of documents seized by the Treasury Council's supervisory board. The final year of the Fugger in Spain are especially well documented in the minutes, reports, letters, managed by the supervisory board established by the Treasury Council in 1632. These proceedings are primarily preserved in the Consejo de Juntas de Hacienda, which is a series at the General Archive at Simancas. And there are some other documentation in the National Archive in Madrid concerning the operations in the Alma del Mine, and also about the Maestrazgo, also the military orders. We have plenty of papers to search into, mainly in four areas, which I refer to in these minutes. The Maestrazgos on the one hand, the Alma del Mine on the other hand, also about the asientos, no? the money lent to the monarchy across Europe, and the last one and the fourth one is the bank of deposit, the activity of banking of the Fugger. Concerning these two, the second point regarding the banking activity of the Fugger House in Madrid, it is offered in the last paper of this presentation, in the paper of this presentation, the initial examination of this activity, which is being carried on by my colleague Elena García Guerra, and this constitutes one of the fundamental aspects characterizing the financial practice in that era, yet remain largely under study. The capital of commercial and financial firms established in the Middle Ages, as in the early modern period, consisted in the individual contributors of the partners in money, in goods, or credit, and also the capital of the external investors, what we might call depositors. But in the compañías de dinero, or money companies, of the 16th century, this deposit or contribution of capital are known as puestos, placements. In the beginning of these placements, these placements were hidden by loss or gain, never had a fixed rate interest, due to the danger of being charged with the crime of usury. However, in 1623, Philip IV gave license to the Fugger to reward deposits by particulars with an interest rate of 5% return. Let me just read one small paragraph, because this is important. This is one of the first time, at least I've seen one license like this. It says, by the present, I give and grant to the said heirs of Marco and Cristobal Fugger, brothers, license and authority to accept on deposit or otherwise from any persons any amounts of maravedis, paying them interest or returns at the rate of 5% per year, calculated on the amount and for the duration that it remains in their possession, without the said Fuggares, their agents, or the owners of the money and deposits, or any person involved, incurring in any of the penalties established by the laws and pragmatic sanction of these realms. This is important, as I said, because why do Philip IV, in this case, give license to the Fugger to license to pay a fixed interest rate of 5%? Because the money, not the Fugger, the king, not the Fugger, needs the money. But so they encourage the Fugger to accept money in deposit and to pay an interest rate. The Fugger didn't want this license, this privilege. However, they must admit deposit at a 5% rate, because just to continue to lend money to the monarchy. When in 1630, the rumor of a lack of liquidity of the house of Fugger spread out, especially in the royal household, many people went to the house to withdraw their money, and the cashiers give back the money as much as they could. but when it was finished, then the people complained and were very annoyed about that. So now we have, with all documentation, we have to explain the real crisis and the causes that, of this, we call bankruptcy, but actually it's not a bankruptcy, it's an intervention of the whole house, because it was an enormous capital to save and to keep on going. Thank you very much.
Grazie a tutti. Allora facciamo una pausa di 20 minuti e dopo aveva la discussione, il dibattito. Noi ricordiamo che per partecipare nel dibattito doveva ramplire le scheda. Grazie a tutti. Sì. la sessione. Chi voleva prendere una questione deve riempire. Niente? Aveva. Non so, qua. Cominciamo con la prima relazione del professore Joris van Nentul por Lewis White per fare la traduzione. Grazie.
Grazie. Thank you all for very interesting papers. My question is for Joris. You convincingly sketch the importance of support at the municipal, the provincial, and the national level. I guess my question is, to what extent do you think the Dutch perspective is distinctive? Because this sounds very similar in lots of ways to what we see in England, in France, and in other countries. So what makes the United Provinces unique in this sense, if at all? Thank you.
Allora, Marianne.
Thank you for a very interesting paper. I have two questions. First of all, did the processing industry for these various commodities themselves in this period recognize common interests? Is there any evidence at all that they saw themselves as a pressure group or that they had commonalities? Or in fact, is your grouping, your categorization mainly just a modern convenience for you? Second of all, the protectionist strategies that you are discussing are from a common playbook that stretches back to the Middle Ages. There's, for those who are working on any kinds of industries and trades, these are very familiar strategies, even in terms of compelling orphans and convicts to work. I mean, maybe not as widespread, but we can find examples in the Middle Ages. So I guess my question is, again, what makes the processing industries unique? Have you combined them because it's convenient, they have this one commonality, but in fact, what makes them different? And I think it goes to the question right before me about what if this is really different, because you're going to find all of this in England as well, France. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for these questions. Let me start by the question of Marianne, the first question. Did the processing industry recognize their common interests, or is this a modern convenience from me that I group them together? So this is a hard question in a way based on the source material, but in the petition there's also this strategy where they say we are all the tobacco spinners or we are all the sugar refiners, and they don't always then sign individually. So I don't really know if they recognize themselves as a coherent group or that it's a rhetorical strategy. However, based on my other research, I would say that they recognize themselves that they're a coherent group, that they're part of the same industry that tries to obtain the same goal, that they're not competing with each other, that they have a shared interest in getting the political system to do their bidding rather than someone else's. So I would say that this is the case. At the same time, I don't have any evidence of them meeting in places to discuss this strategy. And I also find it hard to believe that, to use the example of Gelderland, where the tobacco spinners all come together, that these people from all these different towns all over Gelderland found a way of organizing themselves efficiently, because it's quite a big province, travel is expensive, so it's a bit of both. I think at the one hand they do recognize themselves as being a shared common goal, and at the same time I have no evidence that they discuss this together, that they form a group, a formal group. I think it's very informally. And then, what makes a processing industry unique, or are the Dutch special compared to other countries? To be fair, I haven't really considered how other countries do things. Just looked at what the Dutch do and say this is what they do, and but I'm guessing it's quite similar. But I will have to get back at you later. I don't see Louis now, but I'll have to get back at you later to come up to tell you more about how they are similar or different. And the processing industry, as opposed to other industries, how they are similar or unique. I think guilds are different because they form a group together that also meets socially, and that way they are different than processing industry that's not guild regulated. They're also different than merchant companies, like overseas trading companies that have a formal business structure with directors and permanent political representation in different political levels. So I think that they are different as an industry because they are more loose, let's say, than other types of economic actors. Even the fisheries are united in a directorate for the fisheries, and even the right. So there's more formal organization than I would say is in the processing industry. So in that sense, they are different.
Katia? For Professor Joels, e si voleva for Inigo.
Right. Elario, which question do you want me to Joris or to Inigo?
Both, I think.
Yeah, because I have one question per person. Do you want them all together? First to Joris. Okay. So I would like actually to go back to Marianne and to Lewis. So I'm just going to go there again. I think they're both right. This is neither very new chronologically nor very new in Europe. What the part of the story that you have not told us that might make your case very different, and I don't want to argue this for you, but I think this is something I miss in your story. I'm not sure whether this will be missing in your future book that you're working on this, but I think that there is something the Dutch Republic has that nobody else has, and that's a free market. This is not a mercantilistic market for colonial goods or any other good. So colonial exploitation is, the market is not. So in fact, what is puzzling, to me at least, is that these men are petitioning in the first place. Because if there is an economy in Europe that is open for producers instead of formatted for merchants, lo and behold, is the low countries, because everyone can come and trade on tobacco, sugar, and whatnot. And they do, because the majority of the tobacco and the sugar that is produced in the, in the Dutch Republic is not brought in by the Dutch, not at all. It's the Spanish, it's the French, it's everyone and their mother. So partially, I think your answer to Marianne and to Lou, east of the country, leaving the merchants to what the merchants do, right? And they're not doing very well, we know that. So these two questions. So the free market, why are they petitioning? The second, how is this industrialist infighting, petitioning actually part of an inter-provincial war? Not sure whether the war is there, but there's nothing in the Dutch Republic is not a war between the provinces. Your thoughts?
Do you want to ask the question so I can think about it?
I'm not sure, Ilario.
No.
Yeah, okay, so I'll put all the questions in one go. Then you're rid of me. Inigo, the Concordia. My question is whether there are collaterals on this, because you say it's not a contract, okay, but are there collaterals? Is the monarchy, as in La Corona de Aragon, providing those collaterals or not? And if they are, what are those? Who gets the hot potato when this all goes to hell? Because it does. And how does the Bourbonic monarchy takes the chance that is all going to hell to grab privileges that are particular to the Crown of Aragon, if they do? Because I would think in Iberian history that would be the moment to curb the privileges of the Crown of Aragon. Perhaps they do, perhaps they don't. And my question for the team of the Fuggers, I always find it very puzzling when we think of large business firms, and the Fuggers are a very large business firm. When we think of bankruptcy, I never understand what is the bankruptcy. The Fuggers have comptoirs everywhere in Europe. For the documentation I know of in Portugal, the Fuggers in Portugal never go bust. They never do. The Portuguese council monarchy protects the Fuggers. There's nothing wrong with the comptoir in Lisbon. By the way, also there's no problem with the comptoir that they have in Antwerp either. They have a small comptoir in Antwerp. It's something very small, but they have it there. So what is it actually that is going bankrupt? So, and how the bankruptcy of perhaps the mother house, as in the merchant house, does not necessarily translate into the bankruptcy of the comptoirs. And if that is the case, is there any legality, any possibility that these comptoirs elsewhere that are not going bankrupted because they still have liquidity, because they still have other networks, because they are linked to political systems in a different way, would they be able to move on and continue? I mean, for the case of Lisbon, I know they do continue, right? They even bring other partners to the table, like the Velsers. So this is not it's kind of almost a hostile takeover, right? So I wonder what you think about this, and if you can explain to us a little bit more, in this world of big firms, what is actually going bankrupted? Thank you.
Well,
shall I go first? Thank you, Katja, for these questions. Why are they petitioning? I think the main reason is that they're trying to counter petitions from merchants. So merchants are trying to petition for their interest, and in order, in the case, well, this only pertains to the sugar refiners in the 18th century. So the merchants are trying to limit access from foreign ships because they want to carry all the goods. And in order to remedy this, the sugar refiners from all over the country petition to leave the ports open to all merchants, including the French, as somebody will know. But then a second reason is, and this is more speculative, I think the legislation that is introduced in 1751, that removes most of the trade barriers, is a way of also centralizing the Dutch Republic. And I think that this plays into the drive that results in more petition campaigns. So that's the question of why petitioning is happening. And it also partially answers your second question about these interprovincial fighting. Because although formally some of these landed provinces like Gelderland, they have formally more power than the other provinces because they're the only duchy and Holland is only a county. Nevertheless, Holland seems to mostly get its way, and you see this in the example that I gave, when Holland just by itself decides to increase export duties on unprocessed tobacco, and Gelderland, which is a duchy, then says, well, could you maybe not do this, and otherwise we will retaliate? Then Holland still persists and nothing changes, but also their policy is ineffective, so maybe it doesn't matter, because I think 60% of the tobacco processing in Holland disappears in this period and moves to Gelderland and Utrecht. So I don't have a final answer there, but yeah.
Shall I respondo yo? Okay. So, thank you very much for the questions. I will try to follow the same order as you follow. So, I guess you meant collateral of the annuities. Sure, okay. So, I think it's one, I don't know if I should say peculiarity, but it is not so generalized. I think it also happens in the Low Countries, actually. The general, the collective and individual responsibility for the debt. That meant that from the Middle Ages, debt was secured not only against the municipal state or against all the assets of the municipality, but also against the assets of the inhabitants of that town. And that was actually one of the reasons why all the debates about the Concordia started, because creditors were not just foreclosing the assets of the municipality, but when they discovered that they could not foreclose them, they go against the private assets of the inhabitants of the town. So that, of course, had very harmful economic consequences for the town, for the regions, etc. So, yes, and actually there's a very clear case of free riding within the group of creditors, because the Inquisition, which has had a specific jurisdiction, used that clause to free ride. So it was very bad for the group of creditors in general. So I hope this more or less answered the question of the collateral. And I will try to answer the second and the third questions together. I didn't want to speak a lot about the question of Felipe V in Spain, because it is an issue which is the object of heated debates in Spain about who was exactly Felipe V, because for some it is the father of the Spanish modern state, whereas for others like a tyrant who suppressed all the liberties and constitutions of the Crown of Aragon. So it is. I said that I didn't want to spend a lot of time because it's something very national, to put it, but actually it's ironical that an absolutist king actually overruled or deauthorized, I don't know if that exists in English, like invalidated the opinion of his own officers. He was not that absolutist king who imposed his will over the rest of the things. No, actually he gave the local actors the capacity to solve their own problems. So when the hot potato of solving the issue of that emerged, he did not solve it himself, nor forced his officials to intervene. On the contrary, he retreated and let them do what they wanted to do. So I connect this with the third question. Was this the opportunity for the king to grab those privileges of the historical territories? And this is somehow connected with the talk of Joris here, because it's about petitions. I don't think so. I don't think that absolutist monarch intervening in everything, regulating everything. It's just the contrary. It is hundreds, maybe thousands of petitions from many different towns asking the king to solve the problem. So it is essentially state building from below. People are asking the king to solve their problems because they cannot do it themselves, by themselves. So I don't think it is an active process promoted from above, but rather something that comes from below, from the decentralized action of hundreds and hundreds and thousands of factors. So this is more or less questioning this absolutist nature of the Spanish monarchy in the 18th century. That would be the conclusion. Thank you.
Okay. No, aveva un'altra questione. Carlos Álvarez Moral.
Okay. My question is for Ángel. Congratulations for the project, joint project about the fuggers. I think it's a very, very interesting research and actually necessary. And my question is a big question, linked with the previous question by Katia. Related with the meaning of the word of bankruptcy. In this case, not in the fuggers, but in the crown. Actually, the title of your presentation is in Spanish, the ocaso of the fuggers, the fall of this great financial house. And you explain at the end of your presentation that the fugger was not a bankruptcy, it was more an intervention. But don't you think that it's strange that the banker that disappeared, that is the fuggers at the end, they disappear, and many others, the Genoese disappear. We don't talk about bankruptcies, about them. But in the case of the Spanish monarchy, that remains and actually got much more credit after the bankruptcies than before, we, economic historians talk about bankruptcies. It's something strange from an economic point of view. I mean, the meaning of the word bankruptcy, using for, in this case, the borrower, and not using for the lenders. Just the reflection.
Thank you very much, Carlos, and also Katia. I thank you for your question. And it gives me the opportunity to answer and to tell you a story of only 1 minute. Before this project, we studied bankruptcies, legal bankruptcies, okay? And we found out, among the results, we found out the creation, a brand new, ex novo, court of bankruptcy in the 40s, in the 1640s in Spain, to counteract the bankruptcy created, or decree in the worst years of the 17th century. But that's where, actually, for what you said, for people who are managing the money of the monarchy, collecting rents or some other, or with the estancos. With estancos means monopolies on certain products coming from India, from west or the east, and so on. They are, let's say, small bankruptcies. And what we found, we found hundreds of bankruptcies in this new court, okay? And what we found within this documentation in the Tribunal Mayor de Cuentas, in the I don't know how to translate it, an accountant court for business under prosecution. What we found is the whole documentation of the fugger in that session in the Tribunal Mayor de Cuentas. So it's easy to say the bankruptcy of the fugger although actually it's not a legal bankruptcy. Okay, so this is, you are very right, and I thank you for letting me explain that. In this previous project, why did we study bankruptcies? Because we took in the idea that moved us to study this was the crisis, called the systemic crisis of 12, 13 years ago, in 2008, okay? In Spain, in that crisis, in the barbell, no? Burbuja, barbell, or so, the 100,000 million euros, okay, were lost and paid by Spanish, people. So we asked ourselves as historians, what would have happened? What would have happened if this crisis, breaks in the 17th century? That's that's the idea, the principal idea of why we got involved in this thing. So, and the crisis of the Fugger is more similar to the 2008 matter, the whole matter, than an actual bankruptcy, okay? Because the Fugger are, as I said, an entity not only managing money in terms of banking, lending, and borrowing money. It manages large parts of, it's a group with a lot of interest, but the way they exploit, they profited these activities are also very particular, because when they profit the maestrados, for instance, they don't actually want to exploit the maestrados. The maestrados is the way the king pay, okay, to the Fugger for the money he is borrowing from the Fugger. So they say, okay, I need 500,000 ducats to be put in the Low Countries and in Italy in the fair of Milan or so. How I'm going to pay you? Okay, I'm going to give you this land to extract the tithes, okay, which are maestrados value more or less 300,000 ducats a year. Apart from that, because you have experience in the extraction of mercury from Iridia or Idria and so on, some other places in Slovenia and so on. So you can hear. So what the Habsburg told them is that they have a lot of things to exploit, but the king needs financiation, no? Money in different places of Europe. So that's a mean of returning the money they borrow. Okay, they borrow. So there is not a particular bankruptcy. This is the whole thing that doesn't work anymore. Sometimes, in the second half of the 16th century, the things were okay, but in 17th century things start to begin worse. Because of the alteration with the coinage, with the bejon, with the crisis in the peasant community, in the maestrados and in some other places, there are a lot of things together, working together to finish the benefit of the Fugger and to start, struggling for, they do things that they don't want to, but they have to do because the king ordered to do that. So I don't know if I answered you, but it is not actually a bankruptcy in legal terms, but there is in the beginning, what the king, the Philip IV said, he gets the house as if it was a part of his, realm. And but there is not only here an economic matters. There are some other aspects. For instance, reputation. This morning I hear the word reputation. They say, don't put me, the Fugger said to the king, don't put me in a place where people think I am not going good because my reputation can, alter in Europe. But the thing is that they don't have capacity to create more money and to benefit from the means the king gave one day. So this is a bankruptcy, no in legal terms, but in the whole matter, the house fall. Many letters from the empire, from the king and the queen of Hungary, and to the Philip IV, telling, please don't let the house of Fugger fall. There's a fall, not a bankruptcy, but we have named it bankruptcy, and that's it. That's what I.
Qualche membri del Spanish team.
Parlo in italiano. Grazie delle domande. Vorrei aggiungere, qualche idea a quello che ha detto Angel, riguardo anche alle due domande, no? Ci sono altri fattori che noi stiamo studiando e che ci aiutano a capire, perché si arriva a questa situazione. Lui ci ha già parlato un po' delle questioni, per dire così, più politici, più di un rapporto, economico, politico, reputazionale, ma anche a noi ci interessa la gestione interna dell'azienda, e su questo abbiamo visto che un punto molto importante è l'attuazione propria di ogni agente nel territorio, e come a loro volta, all'interno di ogni territorio ci sono anche appaltatori particolari che devono anche dar conto della sua attività. Dunque abbiamo visto che c'è un divario tra come funzionano le scale più inferiori, che devono raccogliere le imposte e tutto quanto nei territori de las órdenes militares, e dopo anche quello si deve coordinare con le decisioni che prendono gli agenti, per dire così, più direttamente in rapporto con i capi che sono in Germania. Dunque anche è un altro aspetto a considerare, come si gestisce internamente già qui in Spagna. E un altro aspetto proprio su questa cosa è che io mi sto occupando tanto dei depositanti, e anche sto guardando qualche relazione dei debitori, dei Fugger. Cioè il problema è che anche i debitori, anche i Fugger hanno molti problemi a cobrare, non mi ricordo adesso la parola in italiano, a incassare i debiti, ma i debiti proprio che hanno con delle persone a cui hanno prestato, a particolari che hanno prestato, a municipalità, a nobili. E quando si dice perché non hanno cobrato, perché non hanno incassato quello, c'è un appunto che dice perché c'era una ricevuta e noi l'abbiamo persa, dunque non possiamo reclamare, no? Dire a questa persona di pagarci perché lo abbiamo perso. Dopo continua a leggere, succede lo stesso. Perché questo debito non è stato incassato? Abbiamo perso la ricevuta. E dopo ti dice è morta la persona, dunque è passato così tanto tempo che già quel debito non si può incassare. Dunque diciamo che si deve un po' contemplare, vedere un po' l'insieme del funzionamento, della gestione interna di questa casa finanziaria, che è un po' diversa a quella dei genovesi, proprio perché hanno un territorio da gestire. e anche devono pagare a delle persone che lavorano proprio in questo territorio. Dunque sono diverse sfaccettature, no? Che è vero che non è una bancarotta così e abbiamo detto quello di intervento, ma che anche la propria gestione interna degli agenti, anche Paco è stato studiando anche le dispute tra i cassieri, no? Anche diciamo le miserie umane, no? Anche, ma il nostro obiettivo è un po' studiare le diverse, come dire, strutture o estratti, no? Dell'azienda. È vero che siamo ancora all'inizio, ma vi ringraziamo per questo interesse e per l'organizzazione di aver accettato questo paper un po' generale.
Grazie. E un'altra domanda di Renzo Sabatini per Joris.
Volevo fare una domanda appunto a Ioris, una di quelle domande che non vanno fatte, però siamo tra amici, credo che si possano fare. La domanda su qualcosa che non c'è, cioè, o meglio, su come dire, un prodotto o una produzione che non è stata presa in considerazione, non si può considerare sempre tutto. Ovviamente l'Olanda, fuori dall'Olanda, è famosa nel 600-700, giustamente per lo zucchero, giustamente per il tabacco, però è famosa anche per la carta. Allora mi chiedo, la produzione di carta, se è stata presa in considerazione nella scelta di questo esame del rischio ed è stata scartata per qualche particolare caratteristica, o se veramente non interessava parlare di questo argomento. Ovviamente se non interessava il discorso è assolutamente chiuso. Se invece, come dire, accanto al tabacco o allo zucchero era apparsa anche la possibilità di parlare dei mulini da carta, sempre a proposito ovviamente del come si affrontano i rischi, sulla base di quali considerazioni poi è stata scartata questa ipotesi di lavorarci sopra. Grazie.
I think it works with the translation. If I understand correctly, your question is if I've also looked at the paper industry, and if I haven't, why I haven't looked at the paper industry. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. So I will tell you a bit of a backstory about this particular project. So I did my PhD about the Dutch colony in Brazil, so colonialism, and then I did a project about Dutch merchants trading to Barbados, Virginia, and the Leeward Islands, so again about colonialism. But then I saw in the sources, I saw thousands and thousands of tons of tobacco coming into the Netherlands, that clearly not everybody in the Netherlands was smoking this tobacco. So it needs to be re-exported to the rest of Europe, to Sweden, France, etc. But then that doesn't make sense, that you first bring it to the Netherlands to process it and then bring it to Stockholm. Then why not bring it from Virginia directly to Stockholm? So there needs to be a competitive advantage for this industry in the Netherlands to exist. And this might be the competitive advantage of very low import and export duties, as Katja was suggesting, the open market for merchants. But I felt like there was something more. And also, initially when I proposed this project, we were still in the COVID pandemic, and I wanted to do a project that didn't involve me going abroad to archives that I couldn't access. So therefore I focused on the Dutch industry, and I have not looked at paper industry specifically because I came from an interest of colonial merchandise that is basically free in the colonies and is very expensive when you bring it to Europe. And it's not only the transportation that can account for this extremely added value. So that's where the original question came from. That being said, about paper, paper industry is in the same part of the country where I'm looking at, right? There's also Gelderland, the Veluwe area. They grow a lot of trees specifically for paper industry. And I will keep a special eye out if I see the paper industry also petitioning, but I haven't looked at it yet.
Grazie. Another question? Bueno, grazie a tutti e noi riprendiamo domani mattina alle 9 ore. Grazie e riposare.